In 1951, there was exactly one secret Christian in all of Nepal. One. In a nation of millions, inside the only official Hindu kingdom on earth, one person believed in Jesus and told nobody. Not because they were ashamed, because telling someone could get them killed. That single believer is where this story begins. And what came next is one of the most extraordinary transformations in the history of the gospel reaching Asia. Nepal is not a country people associate with Christianity. They think Himalayas. They think Everest. They think ancient Hindu temples and Buddhist monasteries. What they don't think about is a movement that grew from one secret believer in 1951 to 4 million Christians today, inside a country that still makes it illegal to convert someone to another faith. That gap between the law and the reality is the entire heart of this story. The doors weren't just closed, they were locked and bolted for nearly 200 years. A Hindu king expelled every Christian from the land in 1769, declared the territory sacred, and kept the borders shut for generations. The gospel reaching Nepal had to find another way in. It did, slowly, quietly, through a method nobody expected. Translation work done in exile. Missionaries who built hospitals because they weren't allowed to preach. A church that grew fastest precisely when the government was trying hardest to crush it. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how the gospel entered the world's only Hindu kingdom, who carried it there, what it cost them, and why the fastest growing church in Asia is operating in a country where sharing your faith can still land you in prison. This is not a small story. This is what faith looks like when it has no comfortable options. Subscribe. This trail is just beginning. Imagine arriving in a country, sitting beside the king, receiving permission to preach, and thinking everything is going well. That is exactly what the first missionaries felt in Nepal. In 1628, a Portuguese Jesuit named Juan Cabral received royal permission to preach in Kathmandu. Decades later, Capuchin priests arrived, built a small church, made local converts. It looked like the gospel had found an open door. It looked that way. Because what came next, nobody saw coming. From the west of the valley, a king was watching. His name was Prithvi Narayan Shah. And he wasn't just a conqueror, he was a man who believed Nepal had a sacred identity worth protecting. For him, Hinduism and Nepal weren't two separate things. They were the same thing. Christians in his kingdom weren't just foreigners with a different religion. They were a spiritual threat to the soul of the nation. In 1769, Prithvi unified Nepal, and one of his first decisions was final: priests out, missionaries out. But here is the part that shocks people. The 57 Newar converts, Nepali by birth, whose families had lived there for generations, were expelled too. Removed from their own land because they had chosen a different faith. The message could not have been clearer. There is no room for Christians in Nepal. The borders closed, and stayed closed for nearly 200 years. And then, in 1914, a man named Ganga Prasad Pradhan, the first ordained Newar pastor in history, gathered 40 people and crossed back into his own homeland, carrying the first complete Bible in the Nepali language, with faith that this time would be different. The authorities found them shortly after arriving in Kathmandu. The message was identical to 145 years before. Go back to India. There is no room for you here. Deported again. But he didn't quit. because he understood something the king of 1769 never did. You can expel a person. You cannot expel an idea already written in the language of the people. And while Nepal slept behind its closed borders, something was moving on the outside that no royal decree could stop. Not an army, not an official mission. Something much smaller and much harder to block. The next chapter is about how the gospel started finding a crack in a 200-year wall. But this was only the first step. The trail goes deeper. Here is a question worth sitting with. If you cannot enter a country, cannot preach inside it, cannot send missionaries across its borders, how do you reach the people living there? For most of the 19th century, that was the exact problem facing every Christian who cared about Nepal. The doors were locked. The king had made his position clear. And yet, on the Indian side of the border, something quietly extraordinary was being built. Not a mission, not an army, a library, a language, a Bible that didn't exist yet, written for a people who didn't know it was coming. The man at the center of that work was Ganga Prasad Pradhan. Born in 1851 in Darjeeling, a Newar Nepali raised outside his own country, Pradhan converted to Christianity as a young man while studying at a school run by Church of Scotland missionaries. And from that moment, his life had one direction. He wanted to bring the gospel back to the people his family had come from. But Nepal was closed. So he did the only thing we could do. He started preparing for a door that hadn't opened yet. He spent decades studying, translating, writing, building the tools that a Christian history in Nepal would eventually need. By 1914, Pradhan had done something no one had ever done before. Together with Scottish missionaries, he completed the first full translation of the Bible into the Nepali language. Think about what that means for a moment. For the first time in history, a Nepali speaker could read the story of Jesus, the creation, the fall, the prophets, the crucifixion, the resurrection, in their own words, their own rhythm, their own way of thinking. Not in Latin, not in English, in Nepali. A people that had been officially closed to the gospel reaching Nepal for 145 years now, had a Bible written in their tongue. The wall was still standing, but a key had just been cut. Pradhan tried to use that key immediately. In 1914, the same year the Bible was completed, he gathered 40 people and crossed the border into Nepal. He wasn't sneaking in. He walked in openly, carrying scripture, believing the time had come. It hadn't. The authorities discovered the group shortly after they arrived in Kathmandu, and the response was immediate. Turn around, go back. You are not welcome here. Pradhan was deported back to India at 63 years old. After a lifetime of preparation, holding a Bible his own people weren't allowed to read yet. Most people would have stopped there. He didn't. What Pradhan built from the outside, the translated Bible, the Nepali language Christian literature, the small communities of Nepali believers living in northern India, became the foundation that everything else would be built on. When Nepal finally cracked open its borders in 1951, the tools were already waiting. The Bible existed. Trained believers existed. A generation of Nepali Christians who had been shaped in exile were ready to go home. The 2 centuries of closed doors had not stopped the preparation. They had just forced it to happen somewhere else. And sometimes, the most important work happens exactly where nobody is watching. But 1951 didn't mean the doors swung wide open. It meant they opened just enough for doctors, teachers, and aid workers to slip through. Not preachers, not missionaries, just people who came to help. And what happened inside those hospitals and schools is the part of this story that nobody planned, but everybody felt. In 1951, Nepal's borders opened for the first time in nearly 2 centuries. But don't imagine a grand welcome. There were no churches being built, no evangelists invited in. The deal was specific and limited. Foreign organizations could enter Nepal to provide social services, build hospitals, run schools, train teachers. But preaching the gospel was still illegal. Conversion was still illegal. The government had opened a window, not a door, and the missionaries who came in understood exactly what the rules were. What nobody predicted was what would happen when Nepali people started watching those missionaries work. Organizations like the International Nepal Fellowship and the United Mission to Nepal arrived and immediately got to work. They built hospitals in Pokhara and Tonson that served communities which had never had access to real medical care. They established schools that educated children from every caste, including the lower castes that Hinduism's rigid social hierarchy had systematically excluded for centuries. And every day, inside those hospitals and schools, something was happening that no law could regulate. Nepali people were watching foreigners treat the sick, educate the poor, and sit beside untouchables as equals. And they were asking one unavoidable question: why do you do this? The answer was always the same, and that answer, quiet, personal, spoken one human being to another, became the most effective form of gospel reaching Nepal that anyone could have designed. Not a sermon, not a crusade, just a doctor explaining why she had left her comfortable life in England to work in a mountain clinic for people she had never met. Just a teacher explaining why every child in his classroom deserved dignity regardless of their caste. The missionaries couldn't preach, so they lived the gospel instead. And it turned out that was the version people couldn't argue with. The caste system was the crack in the wall that nobody anticipated. Hinduism in Nepal had created a rigid hierarchy where people born into lower castes faced systematic exclusion from jobs, from temples, from basic social dignity. Christianity in Nepal arrived with a radically different message. Every person has equal worth before God. For people who had spent their entire lives being told they were less, that message didn't need a pulpit. It needed one person to look them in the eye and treat them like they mattered. And when that happened, in hospitals, in schools, in small conversations in mountain villages, something started moving that the anti-conversion laws couldn't touch. But the government was paying attention. And in 1960, a new king decided that what was quietly growing inside Nepal needed to be stopped permanently. He introduced laws that made conversion punishable by prison. Churches were raided, Bibles were burned, and the church grew faster than ever. The next chapter is about why everything the government tried made things worse. For the government. In 1960, King Mahendra made it official. Attempting to convert someone to another religion, 3 years in prison. Successfully converting someone, 6 years. And if you were the one who converted, 1 year. Churches were raided, Bibles were confiscated and burned. Pastors were arrested in front of their congregations. The government had looked at the quiet growth happening inside hospitals and schools and decided it needed to be crushed before it went any further. What happened next is the part of this story that keeps repeating itself across every country on this channel and never stops being remarkable. The church grew anyway, not slowly, not quietly. It grew faster under persecution than it had grown under relative tolerance. Believers who were arrested came out of prison more committed than when they went in. Communities that watched their pastor get taken away didn't scatter. They regrouped and kept meeting, just in smaller groups, in more locations, harder to find. The prohibition of conversion didn't produce fear. It produced something the government hadn't planned for: a church that had no room for nominal believers. Every single person in those rooms had counted the cost and chosen to be there anyway. Christian persecution in Nepal didn't weaken the movement. It filtered it down to the people who were absolutely serious. And serious people are very hard to stop. By 1975, 15 years into the harshest period of persecution, there were an estimated 500 to 600 believers in Nepal. By 1990, that number had exploded to 40,000 baptized Christians. All of it happening underground. All of it happening while conversion was a criminal offense. All of it spreading the same way it had always spread in Nepal. Not through foreign missionaries standing on stages, but through one Nepali person telling another Nepali person something that had changed their life. A retired Gurkha soldier returning to his village after years in the British Army, quietly gathering neighbors in his home. A woman healed in a missionary hospital, telling her family what had happened. The fastest growing church in Asia wasn't being built by professionals. It was being built by ordinary people who had found something they couldn't stop talking about. And then 1990 arrived. Nepal transitioned to a multi-party democracy, and the strictest anti-conversion enforcement began to loosen. For the first time, Nepali Christians could gather with slightly less fear of immediate arrest. What happened next stunned even the people who had been inside the movement. Churches that had been meeting in secret suddenly had the courage to meet more openly. Believers who had been isolated in their villages discovered that communities just like theirs existed across the country. The underground network that persecution had built turned out to be enormous. Nobody had seen the full size of it because it had been deliberately hidden. When the lights came on, the room was full. But the story doesn't end with 1990, because the laws didn't disappear. They evolved. And today, Nepal is a secular republic with anti-conversion legislation still on the books, and a church that just keeps growing anyway. The final chapter is about what Nepal looks like right now, and the numbers are extraordinary. Let's put some numbers on the table. In 1951, one secret believer. By 1990, 40,000 baptized Christians. Today, conservative estimates put the number at over 1.5 million, with independent researchers suggesting the real figure is closer to 4 million. That is a movement that doubled in size in the last decade alone, inside a country that still has laws making evangelism a criminal offense, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. The fastest growing church in Asia is operating under active legal restriction. And it is growing anyway, faster than the laws can keep up with. The geography of that growth tells its own story. Nepal has over 7,700 churches today, scattered across mountain valleys, remote hill districts, and urban centers alike. Some congregations meet in purpose-built buildings in Kathmandu. Others gather in living rooms in villages so remote that the pastor arrives on foot after walking for hours on mountain trails. There is a church in the district of Fakal where 30 members walk 2 hours each way every single week just to attend a service. Not because they have to, because they choose to. That kind of commitment doesn't come from convenience. It comes from conviction. The kind that gets built when faith costs something real. Christianity in Nepal today is not a foreign import being maintained by outside money and foreign missionaries. It is a movement led by Nepali people, funded by Nepali communities, and spreading through Nepali relationships. The same pattern that started it, one person telling another person something that changed their life, is still the primary engine of growth. Pastors like Arjun, who was raised by missionary doctors and now trains the next generation of church planters, travel dangerous mountain roads by bus and motorbike to reach villages that have never had a congregation. The work is hard, the roads are bad, the legal risk is real, and nobody is stopping. The caste angle cannot be overstated when understanding why Hindu Kingdom turns Christian is not just a headline, but a lived reality for millions of Nepali people. Many of Nepal's Christians come from lower castes, people who found in the gospel a dignity that the social structure they were born into had systematically denied them. But the movement has also reached high-caste Hindus, Buddhist communities, and tribal groups across the country. One Nepali church elder described his own conversion simply, "No evangelist came to me. I started reading the Bible, and I could not stop." That sentence captures something about Nepal's church that statistics alone never will. Which brings us to the question this video has been carrying since the very first second. How do you explain a movement that grew from one secret believer to millions, inside a country that was trying to stop it the entire time? The conclusion is next, and it doesn't avoid that question. One chapter left, and it answers everything this story has been building toward. In 1951, one person believed in Jesus in secret in the entire country of Nepal. One. And the kingdom around them had made its position clear for nearly 2 centuries. There is no room for this here. What happened between that single believer and the millions of Nepali Christians gathering in mountain villages, urban apartments, and remote hillside churches today is not a story that fits neatly into any political or sociological framework. It is a story about what happens when something refuses to stop, even when every available force is trying to make it stop. Think about what the gospel had to survive to get here. A king who expelled every Christian from the land and declared the territory sacred Hindu ground. 2 centuries of closed borders. A pastor deported from his own homeland at 63 years old, carrying a Bible his people weren't allowed to read. Laws that sent believers to prison for sharing their faith. Raids, confiscations, burned scriptures. And through all of it, the church grew. Not despite the pressure. In many documented cases because of it. Every arrest made the story more compelling. Every persecution produced believers more serious than the ones before them. Nepal today is not a perfect nation. Anti-conversion laws are still on the books. Pastors still face court cases on fabricated charges. Christians still risk family rejection, community exclusion, and legal consequences for their faith. The trail is not finished, but the distance between one secret believer in 1951 and a movement of millions today, led by Nepali people, funded by Nepali communities, spreading through Nepali relationships, is one of the most remarkable journeys in the entire Christian history of Asia. And it started with one person who believed something true and couldn't stop believing it, even when everything said they should. The trail doesn't end here. Share this story. And if you want to know which nation we're covering next, the answer is already waiting for you on this channel.